in my heart while I'm away. Till we meet once again, you.
The struggle has now reached the point where it has become nothing less than a matter of saving freedom itself and of saving the world from a condition of universal anarchy and chaos.
So Canada went into the war when, and did they go in 39?
Oh yeah, right away.
And then you ended up in, being inducted in, was it 41?
42. Well, in 41 I was taking the pre-enlistment course, which they paid me to take so much a week, and I stayed up in a house in Hamilton. I got room and board for $5 a week.
When did you know that you wanted to get into the war? Like when they went in 39, were you excited about the idea then?
Well, shortly after the war started, they made a flying instruction school out of St. Catharines Airport, and that was an elementary flying training school. And there were airplanes over the house all the time, day and night, and I was constantly out there looking at them and longing to be part of it. But along with that, I had my paper route, and I would race home every night after my papers to hear the news on the radio. Edwin C. Hill was one of the famous commentators, and Lowell Thomas is another, and they gave you a pretty good breakdown of what was happening. And especially when the Battle of Britain started, became my ambition to get involved in that and fly a Spitfire. And that was my goal. When I joined up, I wanted to be a part of that.
Did you find that other kids were as excited about it too, and wanting to get in some capacity in the war?
Oh, you can't imagine the number of people that are on that roll of honor in front of the city hall down there in St. Catharines.
Mm-hmm.
I knew 75% of those people, and I remember right to this day what they looked like and what they were like. Just, they joined up with a lot of enthusiasm and ambition and so on.
So everybody was eager and wanted to get involved, eh?
Yeah. There were some people that, that didn't want to. As the war progressed, there were objectors and so on, and eventually they called them zombies. And then when Mackenzie King made conscription compulsory, they had a loophole for these people so that they could join up, but they wouldn't have to get involved in any fighting. They'd be at home more or less, in office positions or many of the other trades that were necessary at the time. And
at that time, would Monsignor have been in the seminary?
Yeah, he went in around 1936, which is well before the war started. And he was on the verge of coming out and joining up. And I talked about it, I know, a couple of times. And I'd go and visit him in my uniform, and he'd want to follow me out pretty well, And I shot up the St. Augustine Seminary in Harvard a couple of times, and then I'd go back and visit all the seminarians there. They just, they're so anxious they really wanted to be a part of it too, and they didn't know. Some of them left, of course, and did join the service. Manning Depot, the Coliseum in the Exhibition Park, Toronto, was the induction center for the RCAF recruits in the Eastern Air Command. Standing in the Coliseum, facing the main door to the Coliseum, which is on the south side, and that's where many, many thousands of aspiring young airmen pass through on their way to a career in the Air Force. As for myself, at that day we were coming in a busload from the recruiting center in Hamilton, and we all sort of bunched in through that door and stood in front of everybody. The Coliseum was loaded with airmen and of all sorts, some kind of a ceremony going on. But as we stood there with our mouths hanging open, somebody hollered out, "Is anybody there from the West?" And a couple of our buddies stood forward, hoping to see a familiar face. But the Coliseum roared back at us and said, "Up the West." There were literally thousands of us being processed through medicals, marching drills, lectures, interviews, numerous needle injections, etc., etc. The Coliseum was, and still is today, the home of the Royal Canadian Winter Fair. All of its buildings, including the sheep pen, the pig pen, the cattle stalls, and the horse palace, were utilized for our use and became sleeping rooms, mess halls, parade squares, you name it. Well, from initial training school at Toronto, I was posted to number 12 Elementary Flying Training School of Goderich, which had Tiger Moth aircraft. They were a biplane and fully aerobatic. There was a 19.5 gallon gas tank up above the pilot's seat between the two upper wings. And it was just a beautiful plane to fly. Russ King was the name of the instructor that it was assigned to me. And he came into the flight shack, asked for me, and said, "Grab your chute, we're going for a ride." And so we're walking out to the aircraft, and I asked him if he'd do some aerobatics for me. And he said, "Yeah, you can rest assured we'll do that." But he also said that I had to listen very intently at anything he said, and I should be prepared to repeat it word for word on request at any time. So that was really the kind of a person he was. He was demanding, but he was thorough, and he was good. And I got to find that out that very day. Anyway, when we got up in the air, he started the aerobatics, and it was, I know he was trying to black me out. He was sitting in the front seat watching me in the rear view mirror, and I was sitting in the back seat. So I was aware of this, so I put my face forward in full view of him, and I smiled and tried to keep my eyes open. And I don't think he knew that I did black out a couple of times because I had frozen that image in my face. But this kind of thing held true for most of our trips. He was a strict disciplinarian as far as flying was concerned, and I benefited from it. I can remember as I moved along, well, as far as soloing is concerned, he thought I was ready after, as I recall, 5 hours. I may be a little bit wrong about that. That was a bit premature as far as most people were concerned, but he thought I was ready anyway. And as it happened, the guy that checked me out, the other instructor, said that I needed a little more time. So after I did another hour or so of flying, I was tested again, and away I went. And I was still one of the first ones to solo on our course. I can remember one day I said to Russ, I have an uncle that lives in Teeswater, which is a few miles away, and he lives right next to a church. And before long, we were circling around the steeple of the church, just above the trees, and he did some things in there at low level that nobody should ever try to do. At just maybe 300 or 400 feet up, doing a spin and then recovering, you know. And you're sure that you're going through the trees. Anyway, that was quite a lesson to learn, but I certainly didn't feel capable of doing anything like that for a long time. But one day I had a free flight and I jumped in the aircraft and away I went. I went over to Ayton where a lot of my relatives lived. My mother had been born in Ayton, and she was the youngest of 13, and her brothers and sisters all had farms in Ayton at the time. And I used to go there in the summertime and visit all the farms and do a little fishing in the streams around there. And I decided to shoot up the farmhouse that a favorite cousin of mine, Cyril Tome, lived in. And I ran the wheels across the lawn in the front of the house, and then I knew some of my kin were out there watching me, so then I climbed up, not very high, and decided to do a quick roll. But I got over on my back and I fell out of my seat, and I was standing on my head in the cockpit. And I still had a hold of the stick, and I managed to bring it around, and almost scraping the trees, I pulled out. And it was a terrifying situation. I just turned and went back to the airfield, and I don't know. It was a life-threatening thing. It was really. I had forgotten to do up my harness. I was in such a hurry to go, and I'm just realizing then that I hadn't heard everything that Russ King had told me about what to do, and I knew why he was so strict. Anyway, on graduation, I was the #1 pilot in the flight when we graduated. That was for the flying end of it. I wasn't really too interested in the academic part. The ground school, they told me I should shape up a little bit on it. One day I was flying over the airfield, and the weather had changed considerably since I had gone up. And I approached the airfield from the east and heading west, and the prevailing wind had really increased to a point where it was greater than my airspeed, and I went backwards over the field because the wind was stronger than what my airspeed was, and my ground speed backward maybe be about 5 miles an hour.
Wow.
And when I got on the ground, everybody was out there waiting to grab the wings so that it wouldn't get flipped over in the strong wind, because the Tiger Moth was quite a light aircraft. A lot of the pilots didn't adapt too well, and as a result, they were what they called washed out, and that meant that their pilot training ceased and they were posted right away. One particular guy that was a close friend of mine that used to join us in our evenings when we could walk down to the beach and have a skinny dip. This was in late September and early October. His dad had been a pilot in the First World War, and he was one of those guys that got washed out, and the day he found out about it, we were all pretty sympathetic with him. But there wasn't much you could do about it. And, I ran into him about 2 or 3 months later, and he was on a train. Oh, it was more than that. Anyway, we were on the train going to Halifax, heading overseas, and he had gotten a wing as a bombardier, and he had his commission. And we sat and talked on the train all the way to Halifax, I think, because he's just a really nice guy. But a few months later, I saw his name on the casualty list. In Bomber Command, he had been killed. Eventually, we were sent to number 6 ITS in Toronto, formerly Ryerson Normal School at Church and Gould Street, now better known as Ryerson University. We were assessed and eventually classified. The 2 categories were pilot or navigator. If you didn't fit into either of these choices, you could be sent to a gunnery school, wireless or bombardier school. Or you could transfer out of aircrew training and think of some other type of posting you'd be more suited to. I was in the pilot group and posted to number 12 EFTS in Goderich.
Well, Dad, it's great to get here where your dreams took flight such a long time ago.
That's for sure. It's just marvelous being here. And I see they have runways here now, whereas that's a new innovation since I was here.
It was all grass, eh?
Well, it was always a thrill to take off from this field because the prevailing winds came from the west, and we're always taking off into the wind, which took us right out over Lake Huron. And there's quite a high cliff at the shoreline there. And all of a sudden you're up higher than you think you are. I did read somewhere where they put a 5,000-foot runway in to accommodate many, many larger aircraft than they've ever had here before, and it does attract a lot of attention for people to come here because of the resort area. You know?
Oh, it's great summer. You were skinny dipping in October here, weren't you?
Yep.
Well, let's go inside and see what it looks like inside.
Hi, Bill.
Jerry.
Welcome to Goderich Airport. Nice to have you here. You were a student here in the 40s?
Yes, in the summer of '42 I came here and took on a Tiger Moth, and it was a supreme delight just to get into it.
And you say you haven't been back here since?
No.
Wow.
No.
There's been a lot of changes since 1942.
Oh yeah, it certainly doesn't look like the same place, but I imagine you'd probably still take off over the cliffs and out to the lake. Eh?
Yes, we do, and you can see on this photograph up here, we have a 5,000-foot runway. When you were here in 1942,
oh boy,
we didn't have any runways at all. Now we have 1331 that goes over the cliffs, and we have 1028 and the 2,000-foot grass runway.
Oh, you can get some big stuff in here.
Yeah, we sure can. We've got a few more hangars than you had when you were here, and maybe we can go downstairs. There's a little museum in memory of the 6,000 students, and of which you were one of those, that trained here during the Second World War.
Yeah.
Now this was this was part of the Commonwealth British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, and this was school number 12, as you know, and there was well over 100 of these schools all across Canada. This was an elementary school, and you took your elementary training here, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. The beginning of pilot training.
And where did you go after this airport? Like, this was elementary, you must have graduated
Well,
to another
the
airport.
next one is service flying training, and it's up at, I went to Owen Sound.
Owen Sound.
Oh, cut that. I went to Camp Borden.
Camp Borden, right, just northeast of here.
Yeah.
And what were you flying in Camp Borden?
Harvard's.
Harvard's,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Right. Well, downstairs, we'll go down in a minute. This little museum is done by volunteers, and they put together a lot of memories of those years from 1940 to 45. Okay, Bill, now, this is just one of the rooms. Down the hall, there's another part of the museum, and at the end of the hall, I'll show you in a moment, there's also a little theater with an 8-minute film of the story of this airport. But I just wanted to show you this part, and as you know, if you look on this map over here, there was 4 different installations along Lake Huron. Just north of us was Port Albert. You probably remember that was an RAF navigation school. And then Goderich was number 12 elementary. Just southeast of us was Clinton.
Radio, yeah.
Top secret radar, very hush-hush. All these Canadians and British and Americans came here to learn this brand new technology called radar, which is was instrumental in
They got a signaler's wing from there.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then furthest south was Centralia, which was multi-engine. So if you were, say, going to Bomber Command, a pilot such as yourself would start at an elementary school, learn how to fly the Tiger Moths, and from Tiger Moths you would go to a twin engine, maybe an Anson or something like that. You wear this white sash?
Yeah. And when you go to service, it moves down to the front of the hat.
Yeah.
in that. Oh no, that's where it goes secondary. Yeah.
So you got that uniform with what? That was your first uniform, and that designated you as a student pilot, right? It wasn't true that some of the people around here said that those that wore that had venereal disease or something like that, right?
No, when we put those on, we were.
That's what I heard around here. That one pilot told me that when they'd go to a dance, and all the senior officers and senior servicemen would say, "Don't dance with that guy. He's got a white slash. That means he's got VD." Now I don't know if that's true because that's before my time.
You know, see the propeller on the wing or on the shoulder, pardon me, right here?
Yeah.
That means leading aircraftsman.
LAC.
But I didn't know the difference. And I was in Manning Depot. They were selling all kinds of things, and I thought I'd like to have one of those on my sleeve, so I bought one. And then somebody told me that you'd be in trouble if you wore it because it's a promotion, leading aircraftsman.
Right.
Otherwise, you're an AC-doocy aircraftsman second class.
Oh, I did. Oh, that's great. Well, sure, pleasure having you here at this museum because I work here every day. I handle the radios. I'm just carrying this in case we have a big radio upstairs. I do the fuel, and I meet a lot of people, but it's very seldom that I get a chance to actually meet a student that was here, you know. We do have, once in a while, families that come in here, and they say, "Hey, Jerry, I'm from the UK. My dad trained here, and I just wanted my kids to see where he trained during the Second World War." So they're really surprised to find a small little museum here. And we had one family come in here, and didn't they find Dad's picture on the wall over there?
Is that a fact, eh?
And I was so surprised because of the 6,000 students that trained here, well, we only have a private collection of a couple of hundred students. We don't even have enough walls for 6,000 students. So the odds that they found Dad's picture on the wall, they didn't even know about this museum. They knew the airport was here.
Yeah.
Here's Dad's picture. Well, they all started to cry, and I almost started to cry too. It just gave me a, you know, that,
I
that
can
chills up my
understand,
back.
yeah.
I thought it was so beautiful. And here's the type of plane you used to fly, Bill, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that a beauty? Oh,
Yeah, that's really something.
no lights, no heater, no starter, no radios.
Yeah.
A lot of memories there, I bet you. And there was always about 30 to 40 planes based here. They started off with the Fleet Finch in 1940, and then they switched over to the Tiger Moth just about the same, in the end of the same year, and then and for the rest of the war, they was all Tiger Moths with a 4-cylinder inline engine, right? Mm-hmm. And all these buildings were the barracks where you guys slept.
Yeah. Remember the H-shaped barracks with the washrooms in the middle and the access from each one, you know, 2 stories.
You slept in bunks like these?
Oh, yes, yeah. Here's my picture there.
Get away.
Yeah.
Could you? Let's see, which one is it? Bill?
This one here.
Number 63, where are you?
Right there.
Isn't that fantastic? Now that is, I don't know what the odds are of that. Like I say.
Where are you, Pappy?
Right there.
You got a copy of that, don't you, Dad?
You should have one now.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? That is just beautiful.
I know where a lot of those people ended up. Remember their names?
Watch that mic is down there.
There's Ray Edge. He was killed in Italy, flying Spitz. And Lloyd Barry, he was killed on Lancasters. And there's one of the Linkert boys there from Hamilton. I don't know where they ended up. The guy beside me, he was an American, his name was Sorg. I had a fist fight with him.
Here? That was here, was it?
Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm so pleased. That is so good.
Oh, yeah, there he is.
Isn't that great? Oh, you must have had some great times though there during your days of training. And
Oh, I enjoyed it so much here. It was like a country club.
I bet you.
You know, all the flying and recreation, and if you flew in the evening, you could go into the mess and they had some food laid out. And one of the guys was a really good pianist, and he was always playing the piano for us, and even classical stuff, you know. And it was just a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I imagine.
And your ass would be dragging at the end of the day if you'd put in a few hours, you know, and it was a happy, tired feeling. I was sent to number 16 SFTS in Hagersville for tarmac duty. It was the first posting that I had in the Air Force after joining up. And tarmac duty essentially was working around the airfield and on the field, putting chocks in front of wheels, directing aircraft from the ground. But what we ended up doing mostly was planting trees. And Dick, the amateur gardener, was a very famous person at that time, and he was a flight sergeant. And he was the one that more or less shuffled us around and told us what to do. They wouldn't know who Dick the amateur gardener was, but he was a radio personality, and people used to phone and write into him, and he'd give them advice on such things. And when he ended up being in charge of our group, and we planted trees, so we were pretty tired of it. But I see them now. They're just a nice avenue of trees on both sides of a quiet little road, and nobody even uses the road anymore. This was the first and the only place that I recall hearing Ravelli played on the horn. And it was, I thought it would be routine every place we went, but I guess it was just initiating us newcomers. It was sort of nice to hear it, though. And it would say, like, something like this: "Come to the cookhouse door, boys, come to the cookhouse door." And that immediately made you think you're ready for breakfast. The time here was 6 to 8 weeks, and before we got posted to initial training school in Toronto. And it was a good experience because I had many chances to get a ride in an Anson, and I met a fellow from my hometown named Bromley, and he was expecting to get his wings, and as a matter of fact, he got them just after we left here. But I hadn't known him before, and I never saw him again. Eventually, I found out that he died in France in 1944, June of 1944, flying a Mustang. And that was just a funny thing that I should remember, but it was a nostalgic trip for me to be here and try to visualize exactly what it was like when those many long years ago. Well, these old buildings certainly look pretty decrepit now, but it's amazing how they've stood the time. They've been converted into storage places and small places of business, as I said. And the runways are all packed with storage equipment. And if I close my eyes and think of 59 years ago, what it was like here, this was a very active place. There were hundreds of airmen here, and there were all these Avro Anson aircraft for training, and it was just a real pleasure. I was fortunate enough to get a ride in some of the cross-country trips. They went from here up to Collingwood and over to Goderich and various other places, and It was just a nice way to get acquainted with feeling comfortable in the air, of course. One day we had we were given notice by our flight sergeant that we were going to do a lot of drilling and so on, because the provost marshal for the district was going to come and inspect us, and we had to be perfect. And that involved handling the rifles and marching and so on and so forth. For some reason or another, I don't know what it was, because of the slope of my shoulder or what it was, but I couldn't keep the rifle in the right position. It was pointed off in a different direction from everybody else's. And try as I may, I couldn't do anything about it. So the flight sergeant said, look, we'll excuse you from the parade, and you can drop out, and you'll get all the benefits that the others are going to get if they're successful. You'll get a new uniform, and you'll get a 48-hour pass. So he couldn't offer me anything nicer than that, but I was too independent, and I wanted to learn how to handle a rifle, because it wasn't a real necessary requirement, but it was a skill thing. So anyway, all went off well, and I was in the parade, and nobody noticed that the gun wasn't held right. It turned out that it was the air officer commanding that was coming, and that was the reason for the big fuss about everything that had to be done so properly. And as he came on the station, the trees all looked nice, and the station was all looking beautiful. And we had a nice band. We marched by, and as I said, it was a beautiful day, and we ended up getting praised by the air officer commanding, and we also got our 48-hour pass and our new uniforms. And within the next week, we were off to initial training school, and it was a time to be very happy, because it was the start of our adventure in the Air Force. Well, that's quite a hike up here to the northern woods.
Well, how many years has it been since you've been to base boarding, Dad?
Oh, 50 some odd.
50 some odd years.
Maybe 60.
Wow.
It's certainly not the same place now as it was then, but there's been a lot of changes in the world as well. And we're going to go into the museum now and get a view of what it was like back then as best we can.
Should be some good things in here, I imagine.
Yes, and you can compare it with modern equipment too. This aircraft was manufactured in a revolutionary way with the use of stretched metal for all the surfaces, not including, of course, the ailerons, the elevators, and the rudder, which was fabric. It was capable of all the requirements that anybody had to have for fighter pilot training, because it could do all of those maneuvers. Because of early crashes of this aircraft, and people in an inverted attitude on crash were invariably wiped out, but after that they modified the aircraft and put a roll bar between the front and the back seats, which was responsible for saving a number of lives in the long run. But it was a beautiful aircraft to fly, and one that I had been wanting to get into for several years, seeing them maneuvering over my home in St. Catharines. And it had a variable pitch propeller, so the very fine pitch, when you had your throttle open, it gave that big whining noise that was evident for miles around when you were putting on a show. When I first came to Camp Borden, our chief flying instructor, Wing Commander Hiltz was his name. He was second in command of the Group Captain Edwards. I believe it was Edwards who was the Group Captain of the CO. And he gave us an initial, a little talk when we came, but it scared the hell out of us, because he told us that none of us had come there to get our wings. We all came to get killed. And he was pretty upset because there had been a group of Australian pilots in training prior to us. And I guess they were pretty intrepid. And one guy wanted to see how fast he could make the aircraft go on a vertical dive. And of course the wings came off and he tried to pull out, and that was the end of him. And Wing Commander Hiltz was rather upset, as was Squadron Leader Card, who was our chief flying instructor at that time.
One of the stories I was most interested in was the ice fishing story, ice huts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was up in Cook's Bay, the south part of Lake Simcoe. In training, of course, we were obligated to stick to the book and routine and what have you. But occasionally we had free time in the air, and we were always looking for something to do that we shouldn't be doing. And the ice fishermen on the bay in the wintertime are a big attraction, so we'd go down and shoot them up right on ice house level, you know, above the, and with the throttle going back and forth and the pitch varying, and and the fishermen were trying to get in the fish holes, but I guess sometimes we scared ourselves more than them.
So that was scaring them when you're going over top of them doing that?
Yeah, well, you know, you'd be a little too risky sometimes. And,
yeah.
But the propeller goes below the fuselage to a certain extent, and if you're trying to skim along on top of the ice and then you pull up, you could maybe cut the roof off a fish hut. But that never did happen.
Yeah. Any of them ever, could you see them coming out waving at you or anything? Could you see them coming out waving at you?
Oh yeah, they were shaking their fists. And I don't blame them either. But another thing we liked to do in the final month of training before Wings Parade, we went to a satellite airfield, a place called Sibson, south of Collingwood. And we spent a month there, more or less living the life of what it would be like on a squadron. And some of us found out about a sailboat that had been sunk, a two-master up off Christian Island, and we'd go right up the coast, Wasaga Beach and Penetang Machine, and out over Christian Island, and then shoot up the fishing boat. We'd dip a wing and go between the two masts, and it was a lot of fun, and most of the time we got away with it. But one time another group of pilots from another course were doing it, and one of the guys went into the ice after he got past the boat, and he crashed on the ice, and eventually the Indians came out off Christian Island and brought him to shore, but he didn't last very long. Yeah. But just some of the hazards that you put in your own pocket. I remember one winter day, myself and another guy, Bill Blake, who was sort of a buddy of mine at the time, we decided to go down and shoot up the Niagara Falls, and our intention really was to go under the Honeymoon Bridge. And that was what I fully intended to do. But we ran into a snowstorm, and we cut east on the QE Way around Grimsby and headed in towards St. Catharines. And the snow got just too bad, and thank goodness we had to turn back and not try to go under that bridge, because we might not have had a return trip. Yeah. Another time I came down solo and I wanted to shoot up my house in St. Catharines. And over Toronto at 5,000 feet, the temperature was 55 degrees below zero. Wow. In the cockpit. And I put the nose on the, it was a beautiful clear day, and I put the nose on the pier at Port Dalhousie and went downhill all the way. And I raced in over the Henley course, over General Motors plant, turned left on Merritt Street and up Beach Street, and gave the old signal with my throttle over the house. My mother came out, started waving a towel at me. My brother Joe was there too. So every time she waved a towel, I either did a roll or a loop or a roll off the top or something similar. And my brother Joe was just pleading for her to stop waving the towel so I'd go away. Well, eventually I did, and then I headed out across Lake Ontario towards Toronto, and when I came in view of the Scarborough Bluffs, I headed for that because my boy, oh boy, remember night flying here, all the snow.
Should I drive down towards the...
Yeah. My hangar was down there at the other side of the control tower, where our flight worked out of, you know.
Yeah.
But one cold winter night, I was on for night flying, and nobody could get their engine started. Nobody seemed to want to either because it was bitter cold and everything. And I kept trying, and I kept pumping the old primer, and it started to kick over, and I worked the throttle, and I was just going, and all of a sudden it burst into action. I was the only one night flying. My instructor figured we wouldn't be going, and he had a few beers. And here I am learning how to night fly, and the guy's asleep in the back seat. And I did 3 circuits before he woke up, takeoffs and landings. I'm used to seeing aircraft lined up here for about 2 or 3 blocks long, and aircraft landing and taking off at irregular intervals, and while the pilots get their training. Heavily wooded perimeter, and you can see why this place was chosen, because it's so flat. You get a good long runway, and a lot of the heavy aircraft can quite comfortably come in here. We're working on a deadline. We had to get a certain number of hours done while we're here. So they sent us up to practice bad weather flying. But we had to take full advantage of the days when it was good and sunny and bright, and you had more maneuverability. So when we were flying, we'd do quite a bit during one day.
The airfield and the hangars were here. Where would you be staying?
Well, the barracks were, I'd say, about a half a mile back that way, and we had to march down here every day. And regardless of the weather, with the blizzards and wind blowing and the snow, it was, we had our, what they called our piss pots on, or hats that covered our ears and so on. And some of us would be wearing our flying suits, which were, the inside layer was of down and the outside was windproof, and zippered all the way up and down. And we had silk gloves and leather gauntlets. And the silk, of course, was in case you're crashed and there was fire. The silk gave you more protection than plastic or whatever, or any other material.
Did everybody get issued a pair of black gotchis too?
It's a shame to, not a shame, but it's discouraging or to see it's so dormant now and think of the way it used to be.
Yeah.
But there was a job to be done in those days, and it certainly got done. This plaque here is dedicated to the thousands of young men that came from countries all over the world, Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and many Americans came and trained here before the United States was involved in the war. And as I said, it was a case of many, many thousands of them that came and trained not only on this airfield, but other airfields like it all over Ontario and Canada. And it's a thing that it was rather nice to see, even though at this stage it's not too many people remember very much about those days. But in 1993, 441 Huronia Wing RCAF dedicated this to those of us who were involved at that time. And the Air Force insignia per ardua ad astra is, in English, through adversity to the skies. And it says a lot, just those words. After Wings Parade at Cap Borden, we all got a leave for a couple of weeks. For those of us that were being posted overseas, it was really an embarkation leave. And we came to Halifax actually by overnight train. And destination at this point was WW11, which is the takeoff point for overseas travel. It was quite a busy time for us while we were here because we had a lot of documentation to fill out. Like, for example, the decompression chamber tests were quite long and extensive and took several days to complete. They had to find out whether we were capable of handling the rapid descent from, say, 35,000 feet or so without suffering the bends or what have you. If anybody was having that difficulty, they could stop the descent and let us rest for a while and then try going down again. But there was also a lot of documentation, medicals and so on. And of course, every day we're hoping that they'd have a boat ready for us. The convoys were being assembled in the basin in the north end of Halifax. And they also were waiting for escorts from the Navy. Corvettes and what have you were to constantly surround the convoys to protect them from attacks by German U-boats, which were operating in packs in the North Atlantic at that time. And they were getting a fair share of the boats. Shortly after my arrival at Halifax, WW11, I was called out in parade and had to report to the orderly office. And another brother of mine, who was a sergeant in the Army at Sydney Mines, was at the gate and he wanted to see me. And I found him waiting at the gate with a big duffel bag over his shoulder, and it was packed full of quart bottles of Bohemian beer. So we jumped on the streetcar. There were streetcars in Halifax at that time, and went right by the depot and right directly to Point Pleasant Park. So we strolled through the park and found a nice spot under a big tree on the top of a hill, and I had to borrow a bottle opener from a naval officer that was going by, so we opened all the bottles and lined them up all around the tree. And during the course of the afternoon, we seemed to empty them off. And anytime an airplane went over, my brother Joe would just about flip because he was pretty worried about my situation. Anyway, we topped it off with a lobster dinner in the dining room at the Nova Scotian Hotel. And Joe had to get the night train back to Sydney Mines, and It was a sort of an emotional farewell we had. He was my older brother, and by 9 years actually, but since I didn't have a father, he sort of tried to fill in that respect when we were growing up. I was called again to the orderly office, and I was informed that I had a 2-week leave to go home again. My mother had offhandedly mentioned to a local senator who was a family friend that she'd like to have me home for my brother's ordination. He had been in the seminary since 1936, and it's a 7-year course. It was completed now, and anyway, I got 2 weeks leave as a result of that. The senator apparently was a very good close friend and drinking buddy of Chubby Powers, who was a minister for air at that time. And during my time at home, the senator asked me if I would like to have a commission, and I told him no. I had reached the point where my goal was. I was a sergeant pilot, and I was comfortable with that. I later regretted it because, but I was glad to get my commission later on the way I did get it. But the treatment between non-commissioned officers and officers was just not right, you know. Time hung heavy waiting around for a boat after you got all the formalities done. But one day I was called upon to be the orderly sergeant for the following day, and we had to report early, and we were on duty all day, and we more or less had to check on the welfare of everybody on base as far as and answer a lot of questions for them, which we weren't always capable of handling, but they used a little referral system to straighten that out. But anyway, it was a very busy day, as I said, and we ended up in the latter part of the day having to collect all the money from the various canteens where we had been, and needless to say, the canteen people offered us a beer as we were there, and it was our duty to accept because hospitality was sort of rare. Anyway, we were crossing the parade square, and the orderly officer, who was actually a pilot officer, but I told you about that, didn't I? But he was actually a bombardier. That was his trade. And I was a pilot, but I was a sergeant. So, so be it. This young lady passed us, and he said to me, "She didn't salute me." So I went back to her, and I said, "Do you realize you didn't salute the orderly officer?" And she knew what was going on right away because it was quite obvious the condition that we were in. And she insisted upon going to her flight commander. So we did that, but fortunately she was understanding, and we got over that hump. It could have been more serious because we were on duty and drunk and disorderly. Well, security was the name of the game in those days, and there were posters all over the place reminding us not to divulge any information to anybody or speak about anything, because one poster said, "The walls have ears," and that made you think. And so it was no surprise that we were awakened early one morning and told to pack everything up and get out on the parade square. Our ship had come in. So we had to march right across Halifax from the north end, which was Y Depot, down to the dock area. And I don't know how many miles it was, but it seemed like an unending route march. And by the time we got down to the dock area, our legs were just rubber and we could barely stand up. most of us. And the ramp going up to the Louis Pasteur, which was our troop ship, was long and steep, but they were ready for us, and the Army was posted all along each side of the ramp, and we were passed from one to the other until we got to the top and on deck, and then there were people there that guided us down to our next stop. I was so tired really when I got up at the top there. I was trying to think of some ways of lightening my load, and I put my gas mask down in a place that I thought would be fairly secure, and I'd come back and get it later. And it had been packed with a few little goodies that I wanted to have as far as personal hygiene and so on is concerned. But when I came back up, of course, it was gone. And they used to warn us that if you lost your gas mask, or if you didn't have it when you were inspected, that they'd court-martial you. So it's a source of worry. But anyway, I got through to England without being caught not having a gas mask. But I went right down to D deck and below the water line, and there's 150 of us in one relatively small room, but we were stacked up, one sleeping on the floor and one sleeping on like a picnic table thing, and another one in a hammock above that. And certainly cramped quarters, and as far as food was concerned, we had to designate somebody to go down to the galley and bring back pails full of food, and then we dished it out into mess cans where everybody had their own mess tin and their own utensils. And so, you know, that's the way we got by for the 5 days that were on ship. And before we left, we were told that the U-boat menace was certainly there, and that there was a net across from the mainland, from the dock area over to an island, and from the island over to the other side of the harbor, which would prevent the U-boats from coming in and doing a little shit disturbing around the harbor. But I didn't. The Pasteur was initially a troop ship, not a troop ship, but a cruise ship that went from Saint-Nazaire in France to Rio de Janeiro, South America. It was a very modern type of ship. It had twin screws and capable of doing 32 knots and outrunning any U-boats that might be waiting for us. And we went to bed that night just thinking, well, this is the send-off that we've been training for, and we're now headed for a war zone, and the future is unknown and anticipated, but most of us were optimistic that we were going to get by okay. I don't think too many people were thinking of anything other than adventure right at that point, although with all the security that was taking place, it was certainly easy to think that some of the bad things could happen to you. We arrived anyway at Liverpool, and it was on Canada's birthday, July the 1st. And come what may, we were going to do our best. That's about all there was to it.
Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, here I go on my way. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. With a cheer, not a tear, make it gay. Give me a smile, once again, you and I. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, here I go on my way. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. With a cheer, not a tear, make it gay. Give me a smile I can keep all the while in my heart while I'm away. Till we meet once again, you and I. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, here I go on my way. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. With a cheer, not a tear, make it gay. Give me a smile I can keep all the while in my heart while I'm away. Till we meet once again, you and I. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, here I go on my way. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. With a cheer, not a tear, make it gay. Give me a smile I can keep all the while in my heart while I'm away. Till we meet once again, you and I. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, here I go on my way. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. With a cheer, not a tear, make it gay. Give me a smile I can keep all the while in my heart while I'm away. Till we meet once again, you and I. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. Cheerio, you wave me goodbye. With a cheer, not a tear, make it gay. Give me a smile I can keep all the while in my heart while I'm away. Till we meet once again, you and I. Wish me luck.